and welcome viewers. I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. The United States government shuts down at midnight after Congress fails to agree on a funding deal. The Democrats versus the Republicans deadlock centers around healthcare spending under the Affordable Care Act. Following the U.S. government shutdown, the Trump administration has commenced targeting funding projects in Democratic states. Vice President J.D. Vance has warned mass layoffs of federal workers. The 8th Flotilla bound for Gaza has been intercepted by the Israeli forces. Dozens of activists, including Swedish climate campaigner Greta Thunberg, have been detained. Many countries have denounced Israel's interception of the flotilla. Britain says that it expects the situation to be resolved safely, while South Africa has slammed Israel, terming it as a continued violation of international law. The United States will provide Ukraine with intelligence on long-range energy infrastructure targets inside Russia and is also urging NATO allies to do the same. This move marks US President Donald Trump's first major policy shift in support of Kiev, as Washington also is considering sending long-range Tomahawk missiles. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will meet around 50 European heads of state and EU leaders at the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen today. President Zelensky will also hold a joint press conference with the Prime Minister of Denmark. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has ordered a crackdown on anti-Chinese and anti-foreigner rallies, warning that they harm the country's image and economy. The move comes as Seoul aims to boost tourism from China under a new visa-free program and prepares for Chinese President Xi Jinping's expected visit to the APEC summit on 31st October. 26 people have lost their lives after a boat capsized on the river Niger in Nigeria. This is the latest in a series of deadly waterway accidents in the country, where overloading and poorly maintained vessels remain and pose major risks. All right, viewers, those were the headlines, and we have some important updates coming in from the United Kingdom. Reports are now coming in from Manchester of a stabbing incident outside a synagogue. Now, according to the police, 4 people have been wounded and the man believed to be the offender has now been shot. Reports are still unclear as to whether the suspect is deceased or not. Now, the Greater Manchester Police says that it has declared Plato, which is the national code word used by the police and emergency services when responding to a quote-unquote marauding terror attack. Meanwhile, a white lorry marked with bomb disposal is now at the scene, as per reports. Now, this comes after officers were called to the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue on Middleton Road, Crumpsall, at 9:31 a.m. local time, after a member of the public reported seeing a car driven towards the people gathered and a man being stabbed as well. Now, paramedics arrived at the scene 10 minutes later and are currently tending to the 4 injured members of the public who suffered wounds from both the vehicle and through stabbing as well. Now, authorities are urging the public to avoid the area as the investigation continues. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has stated that he is appalled by the attack at this synagogue and that his thoughts are with the loved ones of all those who've been affected. Now, according to reports, Prime Minister Starmer, who is currently in Copenhagen for a meeting with the EU leaders, may fly back to the UK early to chair an emergency COBRA meeting in light of this tragic incident. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Alexander Seal, French and British journalist, joining us from London. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been seeing an increased incidence of such stabbings taking place across the United Kingdom, and this latest incident outside a synagogue has now drawn in sharp reactions from across political fault lines in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister has also stated that it's appalling.
Yes, so the attack happened just before Yom Kippur, a day of fasting, prayer, and reflection for Jewish communities worldwide. Because many people were gathering at the synagogue, security was already heightened, and the timing has deepened concerns within the Jewish community, as this is a particular sacred and vulnerable time. At this stage, the authorities have not officially classified it as a terrorist attack. Declaring a Plato response shows the seriousness of the situation, but it does not automatically mean the motive was terror-related, because instigators are still gathering evidence to determine whether it was a hate crime or an act of terrorism or driven by other motives.
And in your assessment, what should the British government at this time do to curtail such incidents? Because we've been seeing this is not the only such incident of stabbing that has taken place. We've seen a recent surge in such cases in London as well.
Yes, absolutely. There were a few stabbings in London and in Manchester and different parts of the UK. But regarding this incident, the police investigation will focus on motive, background, and any wider security risk. Security around synagogues and other religious sites is expected to remain tight throughout Yom Kippur, and officials are urging the public not to spread unverified information to allow the investigation to continue.
All right, sir, with that, I would like to thank you for taking our time sharing your perspective with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the United Kingdom towards other developments coming in. We're now learning that Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who was aboard the Sumund Flotilla that has been intercepted by Israeli forces, has now released a pre-recorded statement post the interception. She has stated that she's been abducted and taken against her will by Israeli forces. Take a look.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I'm a citizen of Sweden. If you are watching this video, I have been abducted and taken against my will by Israeli forces. Our humanitarian mission was non-violent and abiding by international law. Please tell my government to demand my and the others' immediate return.
The Israeli Foreign Ministry had earlier stated that Greta and her friends are safe and healthy. Meanwhile, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has stated that at least 22 Italians from the flotilla have been detained by Israel. She's also repeated her criticism of the flotilla's attempt to reach Gaza. Take a look.
Dunque, le operazioni di abbordaggio, come sapete, sono ancora in corso. Noi le stiamo seguendo ovviamente minuto per minuto. La unità di crisi della Farnesina stanotte è stata in contatto anche con gli avvocati di alcuni degli imbarcati e ovviamente faremo tutto quello che possiamo perché queste persone possano tornare in Italia il prima possibile. Dopodiché, al netto di questo, continuo a ritenere che tutto questo non porti alcun beneficio al popolo della Palestina. In compenso mi pare di capire che porterà molti disagi al popolo italiano.
Meanwhile, the Italian foreign minister has informed Italy's parliament that the interception of the flotilla by Israeli naval forces took place peacefully and without any violence. Listen in.
Sapete, ieri sera, quando le imbarcazioni erano ormai prossime alle acque di Gaza, la flottiglia è stata fermata dalle autorità israeliane. Gli abbordaggi sono stati pacifici e senza violenze e preparati da numerose misure di avvicinamento, partendo dalla nave madre Alma. Secondo quanto appreso dalla nostra ambasciata a Tel Aviv, la Marina israeliana ha impiegato più di 16 navi nell'operazione che si concluderà nella giornata di oggi per le precauzioni adottate per evitare incidenti.
Meanwhile, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for immediate release of the activists on board the flotilla. He's claimed that these activists have been abducted. Meanwhile, other world leaders have also voiced a strong condemnation and concern with posts on social media from leaders of Malaysia, Bolivia, Pakistan, Ireland, Spain and Cuba. The United Nations has also stated that it is closely monitoring the situation. This, of course, comes as an Israeli naval vessel is docking at Ashdod port as Israel has stopped this flotilla from nearing Gaza. Demonstrations, meanwhile, have erupted across Europe and Latin America, with protesters demanding the release of the activists. With us on the broadcast is Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. This is not the first time Greta Thunberg has in fact been detained by Israeli authorities. She attempted to do the same a couple of months back, and they flew her home through a chartered plane. But the larger aim of this particular flotilla is to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches Gaza. Now, we have seen a landmark 20-point peace plan being floated by the Trump administration, which of course calls for humanitarian aid and provisions regarding that as well. The ball is now in Hamas's court to accept this plan. Do you think they will do so?
They might, in formal terms, accept the peace plan because pressure is building amongst their friends and once upon a time allies in the Muslim world and in the Arab world. Most of those countries, Qatar, for example, but Egypt, Jordan, etc., think this is have publicly stated that President Trump's proposal, whatever its actual merits or demerits, they think it's a good idea and a good starting place. And so that would leave Hamas diplomatically isolated. But they have other concerns as well, not just legitimacy on the international stage, but also if they were to accept the terms of this 20-plus point peace plan, they would effectively be disarmed. They would not be governing the Gaza Strip. They would effectively be disbanded, and this would be obviously unacceptable to Hamas. So although most parties have accepted this as a point of departure for negotiations, the far right in Israel and Hamas and its fellow travelers on the far left in Palestinian territories are simply not interested in this peace plan.
And speaking of the plan in itself, do you think it could lead to long-term peace in the region, because it does provide for two bodies, particularly the Board of Peace and a technocratic Palestinian leadership body to oversee reconstruction in post-war Gaza? What do you foresee the role that they would play?
Well, I think on the one hand, there's got to be exhaustion, not just since October a few years back, but long-term exhaustion for the Palestinian people, the occupants of the Gaza Strip, but also the Israeli people. This is their longest war ever. And the way in which the Israeli military is organized, it means a lot of disruption for the Israeli economy, casualties, the hostage situation, etc. So there is exhaustion, and exhaustion is often a precondition for a ceasefire, if not a peace. Long-term peace. If I'm being hopeful and optimistic, I'm thinking, okay, if Israel's core interests are addressed and the Palestinian people's core interests are addressed, perhaps there's a foundation for a durable peace. But on the other hand, I look at Hamas's ability to mobilize, to attack, to recruit. I look at the plight of the Palestinian people and the way in which that generates desperation, which feeds into the Hamas narrative and Hamas recruiting and mobilization. And I think no matter what is agreed on paper, and no matter what successes the Israeli Defense Forces have on the ground, Hamas is not going away, and it's going to continue its actions. And that's just in the Gaza Strip. The occupied West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as some people call it, is related but different set of issues.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the Middle East towards Indonesia. We're now learning that rescuers have been given the green light to begin clearing rubble at the site of a collapsed school building in Sidoarjo in East Java. The Al Khozani school, which is still under construction, collapsed while students gathered for afternoon prayers. Rescuers are now deploying bulldozers, cranes and other machinery to aid in the recovery of the 59 teenagers who are buried beneath the debris. Listen in to what was said.
Kegiatan sudah dimulai. Jadi begitu tadi mulainya. Tadi kren sudah masuk, personil orang-orang sudah masuk. Jadi kerennya itu mengambil tadi yang disampaikan Pak Prejer, balok-baloknya diawasi oleh orang-orang. Nanti kalau, nah ini mungkin perwakilan bisa lihat ya, ada juga videonya. Mungkin lihat videonya, CCTV-nya nanti bisa lihat. Artinya begitu tadi orang tuanya sudah mengizinkan, sudah membuat berita acara langsung masuk. Karena timnya sudah siap dari tadi pagi. Ya, masyarakat ini udah 3 hari ya, mereka bertahan di sini. Tadi saat kita memberikan penjelasan ya manusiawi lah. Ada yang nangis, ada yang jerit. Namanya masih berharap bahwa ada yang masih selamat di sini. Tapi tentu saja kita juga harus menyampaikan kebenaran. Kami juga sampaikan bahwa mudah-mudahan, kita semua juga mudah-mudahan tidak sampai 59. Tapi kan kita tidak bisa menunggu itu saja. Jadi mereka sepakat untuk segera dilakukan pencarian.
Families of the victims remain distraught as officials have confirmed that no signs of life have been detected in the rubble. Listen in.
Info minta persetujuan dari wali murid begitu saja. Tapi Bapak Pemerintah itu sudah di ruangan tadi malam semalam memasukkan alat canggihnya itu sudah tidak ada detik-detik jantung itu sudah tidak ada. Berarti itu sudah tidak ada, bisa dibongkar sekarang begitu. Ya, itu dipersetujui sama wali murid.
Mudah-mudahan ada keajaiban untuk anak saya. Apapun itu yang terjadi, kalau memang dia sudah diambil, ya saya ikhlas. Kalau memang masih ada harapan hidup selamat, alhamdulillah.
With that, viewers, we shift our focus towards the war in Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has commented on the supply of long-range missiles and weapons from the United States to Ukraine. President Zelensky is in Copenhagen, where he will hold dialogue with other European leaders discussing the supply of weapons. However, he has stated that the final decision remains with the US president. Earlier, the Kremlin, meanwhile, stated that Russia would react appropriately to the possible transfer of Tomahawk missiles. The supply of long-range weapons is significant, as they could be used to strike deep inside Russian territory, potentially escalating the war. Now, regarding the US appeal to European partners to share intelligence with Ukraine for strikes, the Kremlin has responded that NATO infrastructure is already being used to share information with Ukraine. Listen in to what President Zelensky had to say.
No, we spoke with the United States. We are very thankful to President Trump for this dialogue. Last time we had very good meeting, very productive dialogue, and we spoke about long-range missiles, long-range weapon. We spoke about it, so we will see. Everything depends on his decision.
Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. So, what do you make of the proposal that Zelensky has put forth to the Trump administration regarding the procurement of the Tomahawk missiles? Will this give Ukraine a strategic edge, and is there a possibility of this deal coming through?
Well, my judgment is that it's much ado about nothing, to quote the Bard. Ukraine is already engaged in deep warfare against Russia, just as Russia is engaged in deep warfare against Ukraine. And what I mean by that is that the conflict, the fighting, is not just on the front lines. It's against civilian infrastructure that supports the war effort on both sides. It's against military infrastructure that supports the frontline efforts on both sides. This gives if this deal goes through, and it's not a done deal yet, over the Tomahawk missiles, it will increase the range that the Ukrainians can strike. But I don't think it's a qualitative difference in the way in which this war is being conducted. It's just there's a little more striking power on the Ukrainian side. There is concerns about escalation. That the Russians have warned that this is something new and that it's raising the tempo, as it were, of the conflict. It's unclear to me what the Russians could do in response. They're not going to attack NATO directly, that's clear. They're already engaged in kind of hybrid warfare, just below the level of kinetic warfare, off the coast of Denmark, for example. Cutting cables and the various drone penetrations of NATO airspace and whatnot. but I don't see this escalating in any meaningful sense. Russia's already conducting long-range strikes against Ukraine. They are not going to conduct long-range strikes against Poland or Latvia or Lithuania.
Indeed, and what's also under discussion in Copenhagen is the fact that the United States will provide Ukraine with intelligence on long-range energy infrastructure targets inside Russia. The US is now also urging NATO allies to do the same. In your assessment, will the NATO countries do so? Will they toe the line, or will their response be as calibrated as we're witnessing at the moment with regards to the drone incursions in order to avoid a hot war with Russia?
Yes, well, the U.S. And various countries that belong to NATO are already sharing intelligence with Ukrainians. The question, I suppose, is whether countries like Hungary and Turkey will, and I rather doubt. But then there's the NATO infrastructure itself, which is supranational above these individual member states. And that's all that according to Russia and others, that intelligence is already being shared. So again, I think much ado about nothing in that limited sense, that intelligence is already being shared, long-range strikes are already being conducted against Russia. It serves President Zelensky's diplomatic interests to focus attention on this, to have cordial relations, positive relations with President Trump, for example, which is why he's talking this up, and also to solidify NATO and European Union support for his war effort. And I would put this in that frame rather than an escalatory, this might lead to nuclear exchange frame.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us as we're tracking further developments from Europe. We're now learning that French President Emmanuel Macron has stated that a Russian-linked oil tanker was immobilized off France's Atlantic coast for quote-unquote very serious wrongdoings. Now, the vessel, which is part of Russia's shadow fleet, has been evading Western sanctions on Moscow's oil exports. French naval forces boarded the tanker after prosecutors suspected illegal activities, including the crew's refusal to cooperate and failure to justify the vessel's nationality. The ship, which is known as Pushpa or Boracay, has left Primorsk near St. Petersburg on the September 20th and sailed near Denmark before stopping off St. Nazaire. Macron has stated that the intervention was necessary to halt the shadow fleet's operations, which which finance roughly 40% of Russia's war effort. Now, between 600 and 1,000 ships continue transporting Russian oil and gas despite sanctions. Meanwhile, Danish Prime Minister has confirmed that ongoing concerns over drone incursions and shadow fleet activities in the Baltic Sea are being discussed in Copenhagen. Investigations are continuing as authorities are providing food and fuel to the crew on board. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. So with this now, the EU is clearly targeting the Russian energy sector. Are we likely to see other countries take similar actions, and how will this impact Russia's economy at large?
Well, it has the potential to have a massive impact on Russia's war effort. It is financing it through these sales on the international market of oil and natural gas. But there are two elements to this shadow fleet. On the one hand, it is the mechanism by which Russian oil products are exported. It's not the only one. There are some pipelines, but it's a major one. And the fact that the French in particular are getting serious about this suggests that finally Europe is waking up to the fact that it's dependent on Russian oil, and that unless it weans itself off Russian oil, there's no way to turn off the spigot, as it were. But the flow of oil is only one aspect to this shadow fleet. The Baltic states in particular are concerned that these ships and their associated drones are able to sever underwater cables, which link economies and facilitate communication between the Baltic states and the rest of the European Union and the rest of NATO. So it's a twofold issue and threat. On the one hand, these ships do transport lucrative oil exports around the world. On the other hand, they also carry a kind of gray zone or hybrid warfare threat in that they can launch drones which buzz NATO air defenses, but they can also sever these underwater cables, which apparently they have done on several occasions.
So a quick follow-up to this, since we are talking about the economic aspect of the war. An EU funding deal has been under discussion for years. We do know that Hungary has been stalling this. However, Ursula von der Leyen has stated and proposed what she calls a structural solution. She has, in fact, proposed reparations, which are basically loan-based, immobilization of Russian assets that will not be given in one go but in tranches with conditions attached. However, some contend that this tranche will not help Ukraine in securing its borders in the short term. Do you concur?
Yes, well, first of all, I think Ursula von der Leyen is engaged in a kind of bureaucratic empire building. She wants her role to be a little more significant than it has been in the past. The fact of the matter is that Europe remains dependent on Russian oil, that certain countries, Hungary and Turkey in particular, are disinclined to alienate Russia over this particular issue, so they're not going to go along with this. And to the extent that the European Union can confiscate Russian assets, and invest in reconstruction, that is a medium to long-term project, and it's not likely to help finance the war effort as such. So think about it in terms of reconstruction, financing reconstruction, rather than financing the war effort specifically.
All right, sir. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World today. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus to more developments coming in. We're now learning that the German police has arrested 3 men who are suspected of planning violent attacks on Jewish institutions in Germany on behalf of Hamas. Now, the suspects, 2 German citizens, Abed Al-Ji and Ahmed, and a Lebanese-born Wael FM, have been detained in Berlin, and they are to appear before the Federal Court of Justice on Thursday. Now, 2 of the men arrived by helicopter, while the 3rd has been transported by a plane and a car. Now, authorities allege that the men acted as foreign operatives for Hamas and procured firearms and ammunition in order to carry out assassinations targeting Israeli or Jewish sites within Germany. The suspects are believed to be in their 30s or 40s. Meanwhile, Hamas has denied any connection to the men and has called the allegations as unfounded and has stated that its struggles confine itself to opposing Israeli occupation in Palestine. Germany is a strong ally of Israel due to the legacy of the Holocaust. It maintains tight security at synagogues and Jewish institutions. In fact, Germany does not recognize Palestinian statehood, despite what we've seen recently with France, Belgium and the United Kingdom doing so at the UNGA. Meanwhile, investigations into the suspects and their activities continue on ground. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus to some breaking developments coming in from the United Kingdom. Now, in response to the synagogue attack in Manchester, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has stated that he will chair an emergency COBRA meeting for which he will come back from Copenhagen, leaving European leaders meeting. Starmer has also stated that additional police assets are being deployed to synagogues across the country, and he's also said that the UK government will do everything to keep the Jewish community safe. All right, with that, viewers, it's a wrap on this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX.